Hold on. There we go. Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome back to another episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner with me, your host, Harry Symeou. Hope you're all having a wonderful Friday so far. We're going to be building up to that game against Nottingham Forest at Emirates Stadium this weekend. A big old game for the Gunners, a big old match for Mikel Arteta's side, who need to start a winning run. The type of run that could see us drag ourselves back into the title race. It's a big old game. There's lots to get into. There's lots to discuss. Mikel Arteta's been speaking to the press, and we're going to cover all of that off on this episode of the podcast. Hey everyone, how are you? Hope you're all good. Hope you're all coping with the cold here in London. It is bloody freezing. Do you know what? Yesterday I came home and I said to my wife, I think everybody's overplaying the cold a little bit. I feel fine. I went with a relatively thin jacket. I was out all day. I was out in the evening as well because I had a friend's birthday meal. And I came home at about, 10 o'clock, 10:30 p.m. And I said to her, I don't really understand why everybody's banging on about the cold. I'm fine. She said to me, you're crazy. And I said, well, maybe I've had a couple of whiskeys and maybe that's why I'm feeling warm. But today, my God, I really felt it. It's horrible. It's awful. As much as I'm excited to have the opportunity to go and watch and report on the Arsenal tomorrow, which I can't wait for. I always get to this point at the end of an international break where I'm chomping at the bit, where I'm desperate to see us in action. As much as I'm excited about that, there is a part of me that thinks I'm going to be standing in the cold for a good 4 or 5 hours. And that is never good, is it? But anyway, let's get into what Mikel Arteta's had to say in the build-up to this game. There's quite a bit to discuss in terms of the updates that he's provided. I want to talk Takehiro Tomiyasu because we had some bad news about him today as well. I want to point you in the direction of some analysis that we did on the podcast around Nottingham Forest, which I think you'll find an interesting watch ahead of tomorrow's game. So I do want to point you in that direction. But let's begin then with the team news. Let's begin with the update that Mikel Arteta provided today. And I just want to bring it up on my screen again just to make sure that I don't miss anything. He was asked how we stand on injuries after the international break. He said there's been some positives, some other things not so positive. Trossard seems to be okay. He trained this morning and he seems to be feeling good. We'll assess everything with a doctor, but he was able to be part of the session, so that's good. He was asked about Bukayo Saka and Declan Rice. He said they've had their first partial sessions today, so very good as well. I think with those two, they're so important and they're so key to Mikel Arteta that even when they're not quite at 100% or when he's kind of playing down their chances of playing, they're always going to start, aren't they? If they're available, they're going to start. And even if they're available at 70% at, maybe not lower than 70, but if they're available at 70%, they're going to play because Mikel Arteta values those two players so much, and rightly so, of course. So I'm optimistic that Trossard's going to be available. I'm super optimistic that Rice and Saka are going to be available as well. He provided an update on the Ben White situation. We knew that Ben White was going to undergo some surgery. This is what Mikel had to say during Friday's press conference. He said, Ben is going to be out for months. It's been a different kind of struggle. It's never been the same thing, but we had to make a decision in the last few weeks, unfortunately. We know that Ben is going to push every boundary, but it got to a point where we had to protect the player, and we decided to do the surgery. He agreed with that, and obviously it will keep him out for a few months. We have to see how he reacts post-surgery. I don't expect him to be out for half a season or a year, but I cannot tell you exactly how long. Now, we often talk about Ben White as this kind of like white knight, like this guy that manages to come through every challenge physically, every fitness battle that he faces. He tends to come out on the right side of it, and we've often praised his ability to remain available for the team. For Arsenal to have taken this decision, and I know we've spoken about this on the pod recently, but for Arsenal to have taken this decision around Ben White, it means that this was absolutely necessary. which explains why his form so far this season has just been that little bit questionable. It's not been as sturdy, as good, as consistent as it normally is. And we knew that he was struggling with problems at various points during the last season and the season before that. But obviously, it's all got too much for him this time around. And we've decided to give him that time off to go and have that surgery that he needs to have with a view to the long-term future. And I think that's the right thing. He was also asked about Riccardo Calafiori. He said, Ricky trained today, so his rehab is going really well. He was able to do certain things last week with the physios, and he trained on the pitch this week with us and today. So he will be in the squad. Really, really good news there as well. And obviously with Calafiori back, it means that Timber's free to go and play at right back. And if Timber's free to go and play at right back, he can cover Ben White. And all of a sudden, Ben White is obviously a big miss, but it's not as big of a problem for us and not as big of an issue for us. The problem is that Calafiori and Timber have shown themselves to be quite injury prone. And so you think going into what's a really, really important period in the season for us, relying on those two being fit, it's a bit of a risk, but it's a risk that we've got no choice but to have to take at this moment in time. I would have loved to hear that Takehiro Tomiyasu was back. But, that isn't the case. And we thought it might be, and we were positive about it, and we were optimistic, but it's not the case. Kieran Tierney's not available yet either. Mikel said he had a couple of sessions with the team, but he's not ready yet to be with the team. And Tomiyasu is going to be out as well for a bit. And I read some quotes from Mikel Arteta this afternoon regarding Takehiro Tomiyasu. So let me just read this to you. This was a quote in response to a question regarding the time frame around Tomiyasu's return, and he said, no, there isn't one. He's going to be away now for a few weeks for him to continue with his training and to change his environment, because it's been really tough for him, as you can imagine. He's one of the guys where the only thing he wants to do is work 24 hours to get better, and he feels terrible when he's not fit. So it's a real shame. We're going to give him the best opportunity to try and unlock something to help him, to have him back as quickly as possible, but I think we need to be patient. It is a recurrence of that knee injury from the summer. So reading between the lines here, and that is all I'm doing. I'm speculating, but I am going to try and read between the lines here. It feels like Takehiro Tomiyasu is actually struggling, not just physically, but mentally with this issue and this latest setback. He's a player that gives his absolute all when he's available and when he plays, and he's a really useful member of the squad. I've got on record as saying that on many occasions. But I have got to the point quite recently with Tomiyasu, and I think I had a little bit of a rant about this earlier on in the season, where I just think if you're never available, then are you an asset to this team? And we recently gave him a new contract, which I thought was a bit strange given that, he's constantly out. I thought it was something to do with trying to maintain the harmony within the group, a bit like what I think the Leandro Trossard pay bump is about as well, which we heard about yesterday. I think there is a responsibility for the club to obviously take care of their players, pay market rate, all the rest of it. And that's the only way that you're going to keep people happy. But I do think some of these salary bumps, some of these sort of minor contract extensions, i.e. adding an extra year on things, a bit like what we did with Jorginho, sometimes that's to do with squad harmony. And so, if you're Leandro Trossard, and I didn't maybe make this point as concisely as I would have liked to on yesterday's pod, but we heard that he's going on to a 6-figure salary. So he's going from, it could be, we don't know the figures, but it could be from the 90K that he's rumoured to be on now to, 100K, let's say, for instance, or 110 or 120, whatever it might be. But the point is that if Leandro Trossard's looking around at the other forward players that play in similar roles, in similar positions, players whom he's delivered more than in the last 2 seasons, sometimes you'd be giving him that pay bump, not because you think that the future is going to show us an even better version of Leandro Trossard, but because you need to show that he is valued. You need to show that so that the squad harmony is maintained. And I think that's a really, really important aspect when it comes to contract extensions, salary packets, and all the rest of it. So, that's my opinion on that. In terms of Nottingham Forest, now I'm going to keep today's episode relatively brief. I realise that we're really close to the game now, and I would have liked to have done this earlier in the day. I got to be honest, I've crashed, man. I've crashed. I've been telling you guys that I've been moving house and I'm in one room and then I'm in the next room. I think I've settled on this room for our streams for the time being. I know it's not an ideal setting, but hey, it is what it is. But I feel like I've hit that brick wall now of like, I've been so busy and working so hard to deal with all this stuff over the last 2 weeks that I've hit that brick wall. And I feel like going to the Emirates tomorrow is going to kind of re-energize me and get me back on track. I did a radio show this afternoon on TalkSport 2 with the brilliant Kwaku Afari, and I love doing that show. But today, towards the end, I started to feel tired. I started to feel fatigued. I started to mince my words up a little bit. And I'm probably doing that on this very podcast. But, you know, I feel like Arsenal's return will re-energise me, and I can't wait. So apologies that this preview pod is not quite as long as some of the others. But also, I did give you a big chunk of Nottingham Forest analysis on yesterday's episode, which is what I'm going to point you in the direction of. So we did an episode yesterday. It was titled around the news that Leandro Trossard will be getting a contract extension along with a pay rise. And if you go to the second half of that podcast, you'll hear some analysis that I did on Nottingham Forest ahead of this game, because I think this is going to be a really tricky one for the Arsenal. I know a lot of people are looking at it and saying must win. I think it is must win given our circumstances and given the way that sort of Premier League title race is shaping up. But I'd love you guys to go back and check that out. I think it's really interesting. I think it gives us a bit of insight as to what we need to be wary of when it comes to Forest and their attacking threat, but also the ways in which I believe the analysis shows we can hurt them. So team news is a lot more positive than it could have been. But obviously the Tomiyasu thing is a big blow. And I can't move past that without highlighting a tweet from the brilliant Phil Costa that I came across earlier, where he just said, is Tomiyasu just a figment of our imagination? Feels like that at the minute, doesn't it? Look, to be fair to Takehiro Tomiyasu, you can't help it, right? You're injury prone. You can do so much as a professional and you can live your life in the right way, etc., to try and limit the risk. And I am almost certain that Takehiro Tomiyasu does all of that. Like, I've got no reason to believe that he doesn't do everything he can. But obviously his body's letting him down. And I just wonder if this is him going back home for a bit, doing his rehab there, change of scenery. If that is the case, which is kind of what Mikel Arteta is suggesting here, it feels like this is having a mental impact on him as well. And you never want to hear that about one of your players, you know. And hearing that kind of made me a little bit more sympathetic towards Takehiro Tomiyasu, or feel a lot more sympathetic than I have done in recent months, where I've grown increasingly frustrated by his lack of availability. So, look, wish him all the best. We'd love to have him back as soon as possible, because when available, he's a real asset to the squad, as I've already touched on. So, yeah, fingers crossed he can get back nice and soon. Tomorrow marks, or Saturday, if you're listening to this on match day, marks Mikel Arteta's 250th game in charge of the Arsenal. That's gone really fast, I think. So, yeah, a bit of an occasion, something to celebrate, I guess. And I know the Arteta outers will say, what are you celebrating nothing for? One FA Cup, blah, 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 and all that rubbish that normally comes from that side of the debate and argument. But I just think it's a nice point, isn't it? The 250 mark, to kind of look back on what Mikel Arteta's tenure has been so far, what it looks like, what it feels like as a fan. And look, make no bones about it. I think when he took over, we all knew that he had one hell of a job on his hands. And a lot of us looked at it and thought, well, you know, not experienced. You know, he's been only an assistant manager. Can he take on this type of role? Or is the role going to eat him up? And there were times where it looked like the role was going to eat him up. There were times where it looked like he was on thin ice. And there were times where you wondered if he was going to make it through the week, still as the Arsenal boss. But he came through that. And over the last 2 seasons, I would say 3 seasons, because we had the season where we narrowly missed out on the Champions League. And then after that, we followed that up with a title challenge. And then we followed it up with an even better and stronger title challenge the year after. So while we haven't had that kind of crowning glory of winning one of the really big trophies, and by that I mean the Premier League or the Champions League, the FA Cup, we won it in Mikel Arteta's first kind of half a season in charge, and that bought him a little bit of time, gave us a glimpse into what he was and what he was about. And obviously we were waxing lyrical over Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang at that point with every passing day. But we look back at Mikel Arteta's tenure now, and I think this is someone who's made steady progress. And at times, the progress has been rapid. Like, to go from missing out on a Champions League position to challenging for a title was a huge jump. Then we made another jump forward last season where, okay, we didn't get over the line, but we got closer. And this season, we're at a stage now where people are starting to question whether there's been progress. And I think over the course of the season, you'll probably look back at the end and say, you know what, there was a progress. There was another step forward. Whether that step will be big enough to satisfy the masses of Arsenal supporters out there, I don't know, because I don't know what the season holds. And I do think that Mikel Arteta is due a bit of luck. I think he's due the rub of the green. I think he's due something to fall his way, man. Like, just to help him to get over the line, because he's doing all the right things. Theoretically, we're doing all of the right things. Have I questioned decisions that he's made this season? Yeah, 1 or 2, maybe even 3 or 4. But I still think generally, overall, we're moving in the right direction. And the bigger picture looks healthy. And it's hard to always see that off the back of a defeat or a disappointing result. But I think if you zoom out and you look at where Arsenal are today and where they were when Mikel Arteta took over, they're in a much better place. And for that, he bears some responsibility. So, you know, I know people feel like we're in a bit of a bad moment right now. And I know that, you know, going into the Forest game, you're looking at it as a must win and it shouldn't be that way in November. And I get all of that. I kind of subscribe to that idea myself. But I do think the 250 mark is a nice point to just zoom out and see where we are in comparison to where we were when he took over. And I think we're in a much healthier place. I think regardless of all the discussions that we have and debates that we have and disagreements that we have, I think that is something that we can surely, guys, unanimously agree on. But anyway, let's move on to the team then that I'd like to see start the game at Emirates Stadium on Saturday afternoon. I haven't got a graphic today. Apologies. I haven't had time to set all that stuff up. So if you're watching on YouTube, you're going to be disappointed by me just telling you my team rather than showing it to you visually like I normally do. But tough. It's been a busy day. It's a late one. Anyway, David Raya would be in goal for me. Obviously, assuming that all these players are fit, I want to see Timber at right back, Calafiori at left back with that duo of Saliba and Gabriel at centre back. Moving into the midfield, I know people have talked about Partey playing at right back in the absence of Ben White. I know people have suggested that Mikel Merino should start because he looked quite good when he came on against Chelsea. I'll be honest with you, I don't subscribe to that idea right now. I still think our best midfield is Partey, Rice and Odegaard. And until Mikel Merino shows me a bit more, I'm not willing to change my stance or position on that. So I want to see that midfield, Partey, Rice and Odegaard. That was the midfield that played the game against Chelsea. And I know Merino was decent when he came on. But particularly in that second half, I thought we played really, really well at Stamford Bridge. On the right, I want to see Saka, assuming he's fit enough to start, Martinelli from the left and Kai Havertz through the middle. There's no real desire in me to see Leandro Trossard start the game. I think he can impact the game. And I think he can share the game with Gabriel Martinelli. But I think Trossard's been so out of form lately, and that's why I think the timing of the thing of him getting a new contract, it's not outrageous, it's not bad. When you look back at the impact he's had overall since arriving at Arsenal, it's been positive. Okay, but the reason people were sort of torn, myself included, and sitting on the fence when it came to whether or not we should be giving him a new contract now is because there's a recency bias, and his form of late has not been anywhere near as good as we know it can be. But even though I guess what I'm saying is that my stance on the Trossard contract is kind of softening a little bit, I still don't want to see him start. And this was one of the points I made. Like, if he's not in our best 11, then I'm always going to be on the fence about offering him a pay bump and, you know, an extension. And that doesn't mean that it's wrong to do it, but it means that I'm going to think about it harder. And I'm going to consider it because it's not in the category of no-brainer. Why? Because he's not in our best 11, in my personal opinion. So, yeah, I'd like to see Saka and Martinelli on either side with Kai Havertz playing at centre forward through the middle, but actually playing as a centre forward, like not playing as a false nine, not dropping into those deeper pockets, just playing as an out-and-out centre forward. I know that his version of an out-and-out centre forward is not the same as everybody else's, and he does still drift, and he'll go left, and he'll go right, and that's fine, but I want him to have his responsibilities reduced, and I want to see him play the game that he played towards the back end of last season, where he was super effective and he was really, really, great for the team in so many ways. I do want to go into the live chat and see what you guys are saying. Sasky Guna says he wants to see Raya in goal, Timber, Saliba, Gabriel, Calafiori, Partey, Rice, Odegaard, Saka, Martinelli, and Havertz. Yep, same as me. Wesberg, just on the Tomiyasu conversation, says, the problem is, Harry, is that Tomiyasu's not the only defender that's injury prone, and it's something we have to improve on. That's true, because when you look at Arsenal's squad and the makeup of it, and you focus and hone in on the defensive aspect, there are so many good defenders. Like, you think about right back, we could play White, we could play Timber, we could play Tomiyasu. You think about centre back, we could play Gabriel, we could play Saliba, we could play Calafiori, we could play White, we could play Tomiyasu, we could play, there's so many players, Kivior, so many great options. Think about left back, we can play Timber, we can play Calafiori, we can play Zinchenko, we can play Kivior. You know, there's so many options, but the problem is that so many of those players, especially this season, you know, White's out now, but I wouldn't categorise him as injury prone. It's not been an issue in previous seasons. Tomiyasu's injury prone. I would put Timber in the category of injury prone until he can show me that he's not. Calafiori's career has been one whereby he's been labelled as injury prone. And so all of a sudden, you know, what looks like an embarrassment of riches when it comes to your defensive options can look really weak and poor, because you lose one or two of those guys, and when you're relying on them to cover a multitude of positions, it can really, really take its toll. So I agree with that for sure. I do want to take this question from Diogene in the live chat, who says, haven't the arrival of both Slot and Amorim, maybe even Maresca, increased the pressure on Arteta to win the Premier League this season? Because of if any of them win it before him, it's not a good look. Yeah, you know, I was having this discussion on the radio earlier with Kwaku, where we were saying that if Man City win the title, everybody just goes, oh, well, fine. If Liverpool go and win the Premier League title this year, people are going to look at it and go, hold on a minute, that shouldn't have happened. You know, Arsenal should be ahead of them in their development. How has Arne Slot come in, taken over Jurgen Klopp's side that were misfiring in large periods last season and got them to title winners? What I would argue, though, on that is, and people are going to say I'm making excuses, whatever, I don't care. I'm going to say my opinion. I'm going to say my piece. The team that Arne Slot's taken over, right, it is a team that's previously won the title and has won cups and Champions Leagues, and there are players within those ranks that have achieved all of that stuff. So we know that they've got it in them, right? With us, there's still players that need to prove that need to show that need to, you know, convince everybody that they're ready to make that next step. So yes, Liverpool dropped off a little bit towards the end of the Klopp tenure, but let's not pretend that Arne Slot hasn't taken over a team of previous champions, European champions, etc., etc. But I too would be frustrated if Liverpool were to win the league and we didn't. I'd be less frustrated if it was Manchester City, because of, you know, the fact that they're a side that we've not been able to usurp yet. We've not been able to kind of climb over in the pecking order, and I get all of that. It would be more disappointing if it were Liverpool who went on and of course lifted the Premier League title. But yeah, you mentioned Maresca. I don't think Chelsea are anywhere near winning it. You also mentioned Ruben Amorim. I mean, Manchester United are miles off it. And listen, I rate Ruben Amorim. I think he's a fantastic coach, and I think he's going to do a wonderful job, and he's a great addition to the Premier League, if I take my Arsenal hat off for a minute. But that squad, it's so far away from being a title challenging squad. Like, so yeah, I'm not worried about Man United yet. I'm not worried about Amorim now. Maybe in 2-3 years we can look at him as a potential rival or someone that we need to be worried about or concerned about. But yeah, I don't see him as a threat right now. Big hello to Adair, who says, not a question, just want to say hello. Cheers, H, and to the Chronicles family from Adair in Brooklyn. Thank you so much, mate. Really appreciate that. Right, let me wrap up with a prediction. It's Friday night. I'm sure nobody wants to sit here listening to me ramble on. My prediction is Arsenal 3, Nottingham Forest 1. I think you're going to see Arsenal click this weekend. I think you're going to see Arsenal look much more like the Arsenal we've become accustomed to watching in recent years. Odegaard being back in the side against Chelsea just reminded us of that fluency that we had been missing for a long time. I think he's going to bring the best out of Havertz again. I think he's going to bring the best out of Saka on that right-hand side. I think that him being back in just changes the complete complexion of this team. My only reservation is that, A, I think, I've got two reservations because I'm going to say A and B. A is that Nottingham Forest are a much better side than people are giving them credit for. I talked about them on yesterday's pod, and you can check that out. We talked about the different faces of Nottingham Forest, and I think that's what makes them a really dangerous opponent. It's why they are where they are in the league, level on points with the mighty Arsenal, going into the sort of back end of November. So credit to them. But the other thing is that after an international break, and particularly given the number of injuries that we've had in recent times, there's a lot of players whose fitness levels I can't quite gauge. Like, I don't know how fit Calafiori is. Like, has he got 90 minutes in the tank? Don't know. Timber, another one who struggles. Odegaard played 90 at Chelsea, which was remarkable in my opinion, but obviously still a little bit rusty. Saka picked up a knock. Rice was playing with a broken toe last time out. Has he fully recovered from that? It's probably not fully healed, but he might be in a position now where he's able to play through it a lot more comfortably than he did against Chelsea, where unfortunately he had to come off, and it was as a result of that injury. But anyway, my prediction is Arsenal 3, Nottingham Forest 1. Let me know yours in the live chat box. I'd love to hear them. Thank you all so much for joining me as always. Really appreciate it.